Super excited to have everyone with us and to have all of you. Let me find some notes and all I wanted to say.
By the way, while she's looking for those notes,
Yeah.
I think it was meant to be the Diamondbacks like blasted my Dodgers, and then of course as I got about 5 blocks away from here, everybody comes out the stadium, the cars are pounding, yeah, and they're like, "Ooh, D-backs," and I'm like, "No, this is like a bad dream."
No, this is what happens.
D-backs, I like the D-backs, but I grew up in LA, so yeah. For some of you guys who are like, "Man, get them." Yeah. Don't kill the messenger, baby.
I grew up near Philadelphia, so. Just saying. Go Eagles. Yeah. Hello, and thank you all for coming tonight. I'm so pleased to welcome you here to our second Just Safety Dialogue session. I'm Caroline Isaacs, Executive Director of Just Communities Arizona. JCA's mission is to create, foster, and resource community-based models for safety and justice outside the criminal punishment system. This requires deep cultural change to expand the definition of safety beyond preventing and responding to crime to include meeting basic needs, providing economic security, mental and behavioral health and wellness, and providing community cohesion and belonging. For too long, the concept of safety has been narrowly defined in the context of crime and punishment. We wait for something terrible to happen, determine who is responsible, and punish them. But safety is so much more than not being the victim of a crime. If you are facing eviction, are you safe? If your child is in a mental health crisis or battling with addiction, is she safe? What our research reveals is that true safety is not just physical, but emotional and interpersonal. It is tied to health and wellness. It is having your basic needs met, your problem solved, and your trusted relationships maintained. And it is created through community-level activism just as much, if not more, than by government institutions. But the notion of public safety has been tied to criminalization for so long that we have no concept, no vision for how we might create safety differently. The key to decoupling the notion of safety from punishment is to provide concrete examples of existing approaches that are producing positive outcomes. And that is why we are so excited to present to you tonight this incredible panel featuring representatives of national and local organizations that have developed innovative, holistic approaches to this expanded notion of safety. So just a couple of housekeeping notes for you. Please help yourselves to refreshments, drink that coffee, please. Have your snacks, super fancy, I know, hallowed halls, have your bags, cheesy poofs or whatever. We have literature tables over here with copies of our most recent Reimagining Community Safety survey that we conducted down in Tucson. The restrooms are located down that hall. And here's how the evening's going to go. Basically, each panelist will have about 5 minutes to give you a brief overview of how they define safety and how their work serves to manifest this vision in the communities they serve. Then I will pose a few questions for the panelists to discuss. And then, we will just move into a discussion. I don't think we even necessarily need to have you fill out the little index cards. We're a small group. Let's just pull together and have a conversation. I think that probably would be the best way to go tonight. So I will just give everybody a brief introduction, and then we'll get on with this thing, yeah. So, all the way at the end of the table here, James Brodick is Chief Program Officer of Community Safety at the Center for Justice Innovation, which works to create a more effective and humane criminal justice system by performing original research and helping launch reforms around the world. James has over 25 years of experience in developing and implementing community-driven solutions to complex challenges. He has helped introduce numerous new programs emphasizing community empowerment, economic development, crime prevention, and other approaches to build safety and reduce the need for justice system involvement. James is also responsible for implementing methods to measure the effectiveness of the center's crime prevention work and using data to improve programming and implement new solutions. In addition, he provides expert assistance to jurisdictions around the country to support the implementation of community safety and crime prevention programming. Welcome, James. And I guess we'll just go in this order after that. Darren Chapman, to my right, is a community pro-activist who has committed his life to helping people. He is founder and CEO of Tiger Mountain Foundation, which has implemented empowerment initiatives to uplift communities and eliminate blight. TMF's initiatives are community gardening, landscape development, audio, visual, and performance art, community service, and volunteerism. Darren is Community Garden Director for Spaces of Opportunity, which is a community initiative of Desert Botanical Garden. Darren's motto is to change one mind and attitude at a time, encouraging all who have been touched to pay it forward, which will undoubtedly make the immediate and surrounding community and world a better place to live. Welcome, Darren. Almost second to the end there. Yeah, that's Danielle who envisioned, launched, and directs Common Justice. She leads the project's efforts locally and nationally to develop and advance practical and groundbreaking solutions to violence that advance racial equity, meet the needs of those harmed, and do not rely on incarceration. Before planning the launch of Common Justice, Danielle served as the Deputy Director of the Viera Institute of Justice's Adolescent Reentry Initiative, a program for young men returning from incarceration on Rikers Island, and worked at the Center for Court Innovation in the Harley Community Justice Center. So we go way back here on this panel. Danielle has been featured widely in public conversations about mass incarceration and violence, and has been published in The Atlantic, New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, Democracy Now!, and PR, is the author of this book right here, which I'm going to have her sign later, Until We Reckon, and I cannot recommend this enough. We're just incredibly happy to have her here now. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Emma Viera is the Executive Director for Unlimited Potential here in Phoenix. She is dedicated to working with community members to address their social determinants of health and organizing neighborhoods to be part of the transformation they want to see in their community. Dr. Viera is combining her 30 years of experience to ensure we are able to empower communities for them to take part in the transformation to health equity and improve quality of life. She works with over 200 community health workers across Maricopa County. The work at Unlimited Potential focuses on 4 main areas of the social determinants of health: education, workforce development, food access, and community support. Dr. Viera brings her expertise as an epidemiologist, biostatistician, and health administrator to the ongoing work evaluation of the effectiveness of health services relating to improving community health outcomes. Welcome. So these are the rock stars, and I will let them take it away and tell you a little bit about their work, how they define community safety, and how cool they are. We can start really in any order. That's the show.
Sure. I'll get it rocking and rolling since I was kind of a little on the late break. Check. Can you hear me a little better now?
Okay. So panelists, there's a little button on the front when you're ready to speak. It'll light up for you.
Nice. That's pretty high tech.
Okay.
Yeah, you see that point on my head right there. I'm like, hey, that might turn creepy right there. It's pretty cool. Exactly. So my name is Darren Chapman, Tiger Mountain Foundation, as Caroline said earlier. And a little bit about myself. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and in that area, there were two incredible things going on. There were a lot of extrapolation of the people who moved to the West Coast for an opportunity. And so they had service laden jobs like cooks and chauffeurs and house cleaning and this type of thing. Um, and I actually say that with quite a bit of pride because their work ethic was top of the line. And so I had something to glean from, something to really look at and say, wow, man, I'm going to have good work ethic. However, it is Los Angeles, a fast growing city. And, from 1945 into 1980, the extrapolation for the younger generations were concrete jungle, fast food, quick, fast, in a hurry. How do we get it as quickly as we possibly can? Now, all of a sudden, divisiveness was one of the easiest things to happen. So there are a lot of gangs that became part of this. As people saw the gangs come in, it was very easy to draw a line and say, okay, this part of just this side of Central is no longer West Los Angeles. We're going to draw a line from Pico all the way through, and this will all be South Central LA, right? And then the feeding frenzy begins of mass incarceration, not only on top of all of this concrete jungle, and then the spiral starts where everything happens and everything goes on, and more people come into that area, and there's less and less opportunity to do something very positive in your life. Because most of your role models are actually in this degradation, right? They're in this unfortunate spiral again of folks actually going in this opposite direction of what would be a better quality of lifestyle. So that's a little bit about myself. My mother moved to South Phoenix, Arizona. Thought I was on my way to Beverly Hills. I always tell people, as a young kid, when you press your lips up against the window and you're like, "Bye, you guys," I was kind of poking the folks, right? Because I'm gone, man. I'm moving on up, Dr. Emma, right? And she moved my behind right to South Phoenix. So not only was it 40 degrees hotter, right? It was the same thing in the same community design or maybe anti-design, right? So again, I see a lot of this type of stuff. I've seen a lot of this type of stuff in my life, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that hopefully we can keep making a ripple in this vast sea of inequity to do something positive. So thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Just go in order. We want popcorn. All right.
So, talking about safety, and I have been thinking. Caroline sent us this email saying, just for preparation for the meeting, just think about the definition of safety, what that means to you. Like, okay, that's a little vague, but but that's okay. Um, so thinking about safety and what it means for me is actually falling asleep while reading a book to my daughter. Is being able to get home and have something on my refrigerator to eat. Is is having the opportunity to breastfeed a child. Is having an opportunity to teach a child how to ride a bike. Um, is having the opportunity to go to college and having your parents celebrating that achievement. To have a plan of what you're gonna do after high school, to be able to have your loved ones when your parents die and die at home in a nurturing, loving environment is it's all these things that many of us take for granted, but it's really the foundation of a healthy environment, a healthy living. And it is, for me, a safety is that it's a tree growing on the sidewalk, surrounded by cement. And when the most, everything around that is telling you that that tree cannot survive. And in reality, it shouldn't survive in 120 degrees, but it does. And it's someone putting a little bit of water to it, and then it grows a little bit more. And continues to, and it's bringing all this shade to your area. It's giving you food, it's giving you that protection that you need. So safety for me is in different ways, no? It's in your family from the beginning. How you turn that around, how you change your environment, how you change your community with the intention that I am doing my best every single day. And it really is not about the color of the individual, the accent, or how much, and the fact that yes, the neighborhood is divided, families are divided because of these components, no? Of just everything, no? It's the traffic, is that, I don't know who put freeways in the middle of neighborhoods, but it does happen. Now, it doesn't mean that it should happen or it should continue. And when we work together as allies to make a difference, that is safe. That is a safety component, working towards a goal. So I'm gonna leave it right there, and then we'll talk about what we do.
Thank you. It's so good to be here with you all. I'll take a second to answer it with an exercise that I've learned from some of like my elders in our movement. If you're comfortable closing your eyes, do that. But if not, like just look down. Just don't look at anybody else. You know, and give people their own private space. And just think about a time that you felt safe. And that doesn't have to be like a period in your life. It can be a couple minutes, a couple hours. And think about where you were and what the temperature was and how it smelled, what sounds were there, if anyone else was present, how your body felt, what positions you were in, like how you were moving. And when you feel like you've really said that, open your eyes for a second. And would a couple people shout out what came to mind? I know it's my turn to talk, but I promise you I'll talk a lot. Like it's inevitable. Like what did you envision? What did you?
I said family dinner.
Beautiful. Family dinner.
Childhood home.
Your childhood home.
My bed.
Your bed. Oh, come on. I woke up at 2 a.m. this time in New York, so like, my cozy bed. Yeah. Anything else, folks? Did any of the things you thought of involve police or prisons?
No.
I've done this exercise in rooms of like 6 of us building relationships in rooms of 500 people. Not once has anyone's answer. There was one person who raised their hand and said yes, and their story was actually the time their mother was a police officer, and she would talk about when her mother came home and would take off her uniform and go shower and like rinse that from her body before she came in to tuck her in at night. That's the only time police or prisons were mentioned in any of what we envisioned. And so we are safe in relationships. We are safe in our homes. We are safe in the care of our loved ones and the presence of the people we love. All of the things you're describing, right? We're safe with our children in our arms, beside our elders. We're safe in our neighbor's home when our own home isn't safe. We're safe sometimes in a classroom when even our neighbor's home isn't safe, if we're lucky, right? We're safe in connection. We're safe. That safety is produced in relationship. And still, No matter how many times, everybody knows that. When we say, how are you going to produce safety? People start talking about arresting people and putting people in prison. When none of that is what we know our safety has been made of. And so there's this elemental thing in safety, which is that it is relationship, and this other piece where safety is always produced by like the larger structures. And it's mostly interfered with by the larger structures, right? It's interfered with by the highways that are built through those relationships, like literal and figuratively, right? Like it's interfered with by people who, when harm is done, remove those harm doers from the community and sever them from their parents, from their children, from their loved ones, from the people who would hold them accountable, from the people who need them, from the people who love them, right? Like it's interfered with by systems that divest from certain neighborhoods in order to invest in others. Like there aren't rich people don't get rich except by extraction. Like Jeff Bezos is rich because of how low the salaries are for Amazon workers, right? Like it's causal. If you paid a living wage, you wouldn't be as rich. Those things trade off, right? So money is extracted from poor people to make other people wealthy. As a nation, Black people in this nation have never been safe. We have ensured structurally, continuously, through generations, that Black people would never be safe. Since colonization, Native people have never been safe. Immigrants to this nation, unless they get like opted into whiteness and like pass the test at the right time, at the right moment, have never been safe. And those are decisions we make. We know how to produce safety when we want to. We know how not to interfere with safety when we choose to. And as a nation, we have never decided that we are actually going to be a multiracial democracy in which everyone is born with a fundamental entitlement to basic safety, to basic well being, to basic opportunity, to having their needs met. And so we have this dual thing that I think happens in producing safety. One is, how do we nourish and protect the relationships that are what make each of us safe, the things that each of you imagined? How do we protect those spaces for ourselves and others? And second, how do we build collective power to change the structural conditions that otherwise will render some of us permanently safer than others by virtue of where we are on a hierarchy of power that has no basis in human decency or human dignity. And I'm Danielle, was that supposed to be?
Wow. So my name is James, and I'm a recovering reformer. And what I mean by that is, if you want to make somebody feel uncomfortable who centers community in public safety or community safety, have somebody read their bio, because it really does make you feel uncomfortable. But when I think back of my 25 years doing this work, initially I worked for an organization whose name was the Center for Court Innovation. And the idea was we were serving a system. We were serving a system that historically has been broken. It was really, really good at processing cases and moving people through, but really bad at coming up with any meaningful outcomes, both for community safety, for the person coming through, for the victim. It was just a broken system. And I was able to think about it from a business perspective, kind of how I was trained, and said, wow, if there's a problem, you gotta solve it, right? A little vanilla ice, right? And I was like, okay, so let's look at what's happening here. Let's figure out if we can come up with better outcomes. And for the first half of my career, that really is what I was thinking about. Somebody who comes in front of a court or a judge who's drug addicted, get them drug treatment. Somebody who's unemployed, try to get them workforce development. Right? It was just common sense. I'm like, why weren't we doing this? But what's increasingly more and more frustrating is I was all the way on the back end, waiting for somebody to screw up and then figuring out, oh, well, what are the right people to start thinking about how we can solve. And then worse upon it is that we really didn't have a lot of tools. When we talk about the world of non-for-profits who say they, whose hearts are in the right place, many times we go into communities, and when we talk about workforce development, the best things that we can do is come up with construction jobs. I'm sorry, that's not the end all be all. We continue this continuation of putting people in generational poverty. And when I think about how do you change the health and trajectory of community, and when you really take a step back and realize how incredible these communities are, and what's holding folks back is the lack of opportunities, lack of resources, and lack of power. And once you start to say, my responsibility when I go into any new community is to think about how can I best serve you at the highest level, right? It's unacceptable to teach coding and technology for something that's 3 years old. The field has passed it by. We have to keep up with the trends. And so when I think about safety, safety is we tend to, in our field, we act as the emergency room and triage is the only way to solve problems. In New York City, they call it the crisis management system. When you have communities constantly working in crisis mode, that's how they respond. When Danielle says, why is that nobody thinks about police? Actually, a lot of people say, let's do police. Let's add more police. The reason why is it's the only tool they ever knew. We have trained folks that this is the only response. And I remember a police captain once saying to me, he says, to fail traditionally is safe. But if I throw more police officers into a community and nothing changes, well, my job is safe at least. But to be innovative and to fail, that's my career. And so what we need to do is kind of challenge all of the thinking. Challenge the thinking of law enforcement, challenge the thinking of non-for-profits who they can't get away with just average programming. It's unacceptable. It's all their responsibility. So when I think about how we center safety, one is let's stop talking about community as checking boxes, but really thinking about who in the community has been most harmed. How do we go about serving them? How do we look at places and spaces? I love that we're going to talk about placekeeping and places, because places have been infested. If we think back to New York's story of how Robin Moses broke off New York City and separated neighborhoods with freeways and the way parks were designed, it was all purposeful. We need to now be much more strategic in how we think about people and places. And this is no longer, as a former reformer, it's not enough to cause less harm. Our responsibility is to create a trajectory of community health and success. And that's the only way we're really going to get to safety.
So I'd like to build off of that and okay. Time. I'd love to build off of that statement and some of what Danielle was speaking to and how, yeah, traditionally the model for public safety has concentrated responsibility and decision-making power and resources within government institutions, police, fire, prosecutors. What do you think is the role of community in creating safety, or multiple roles, ideally? What does that look like in practice? And how is it different from that institutional model? And really, anybody can just jump on it.
We'll do the same. Like I said, we're getting real technical up here, so I was first. So I'm going to go next. Absolutely. So, so systemically, you can take what James said very eloquently and use that as fodder in your organization, in your concept on what you do in regards to, I'm going to create this safe environment holistically because systemically, I'm not going to be an organization that's going to settle for here is your parameter, right? Here is your box. You should be maybe a lower six-figure to mid six-figure operational. No, I want to have a bigger example in my community. So systemically, I'm going to show the higher ups that even though I'm doing this in a lower, quote unquote, income community, even though I've been behind bars myself, right? I'm not going to settle for that. We're doing something that we feel should be as impacting as anything that's ever been done in our communities. And we're going to grab that soil and we're going to cultivate that. But it's going to be an analogy. It's going to be an analogy for how we grow things in our community, including ourselves, including the one person who has a third grade education, right? And remember, systemically at the top, I'm going to change their minds. But I'm also going to change the mind of a person who says, man, that's great for you. You know, now you might be able to acclimate and do very well. And there you go, right? But Now, if we change this maybe into a seven-figure and or higher, uh, and I'm not afraid to use the word billion. It's been used constantly in incarceration, just in the state of Arizona alone. It's $1 billion industry. For goodness sakes, really? Come on now. All right. So I want to change that systemically at the top, but I also want people to understand. Like I said, I'm not ashamed to say that my grandfather was a chauffeur driver and my grandmother cleaned houses. I'm not ashamed to say that because that's how they purchased their first home. And that's how I became a homeowner. 20 doors over after incarceration, right? So maybe I am just one example, but I can now point to thousands of others who have taken that quote unquote menial opportunity, realize what you guys are saying as far as galvanization and getting together. We can actually turn this tide. And so there's something in it for you. You're not going to be disconnected as I sit on the 15th floor or I sit at Arizona State University having this conversation. Man, I am you, right? And when I bring that bag back, you got to check, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Close the doors, y'all. Brother, get ready to get one more fill. No. All right. That's horrible humor. But really, so it's important that literally all of us, right, very inclusively need to feel that what's in it for me, that safety factor, that family cushion. When you mentioned when you close your eyes, when you think about a safe place, I thought about my grandmother's living room. And I remember the conversation that I had in my grandmother's living room. She's been gone for almost 15 years. However, the best of me actually speaks. She that's her speaking through me. But I remember her in that living room saying, "Hey, son, I want you to be careful out there. Keep your guard up." And she said something that was very striking. She said, "And watch out for the LAPD, LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department." And I thought, okay, grandmama kind of grew up in a different age. The police actually give folks ride-alongs. And I hopped in one of the police cars. We were playing baseball. They set me in the back seat. They drove me around the corner, right? Hey, who wants to do a ride-along? All the other kids, man, their mommies and daddies who I didn't have my mommy and daddy in the picture, right? Um, they said, no, Tiger, don't do that. That was my nickname, my nickname. And I hopped in and I'm like, oh man, we're messing this thing up, man. These guys actually do ride along, brother. And I saw it on like the news. It looks like it's fun. Then they took me around the corner and there was this lady crying hysterically. And they hopped out the car and he said, is that the guy in the back seat that stole your purse? That was my experience. I was about 7, maybe 8 years old. And I looked and I went, oh, I'll keep it PG-13. Shoot. Yeah, 7 years old, I knew how to say the other word. But I didn't steal her purse. But that's one of my first charges. I had been charged for murder, charged for armed robbery right here in Scottsdale. Yeah, on my way to teaching school as I was a full-time student at Arizona State University. So you're absolutely correct. My bigger figure, even in now becoming a property owner, now becoming a seven-figure operational nonprofit, it hasn't changed. My safety is still like way over here, and then I gotta put on my best fit. I mean, I got one more day, man, to show these guys, man, that we're still connected to something. So my safety might be a little bit different, but this is what I strive for. So we can still feel okay, and maybe we only have this slice of our world, but again, we got to make some of these types of efforts. So.
So for me, in some things that we are doing in Title Limited Potential is working with the family in during their prenatal and postnatal care. And it's really working in that family unity and the importance of that component. He's he's also working in the neighborhoods themselves, but listening to community. So there is the misconception of bringing things to the community and doing all of these things for low income neighborhoods. But there is no real effort in listening to what the needs are, what their wants are. And it's not about imposing things, but what do what do they want? What do we want as a whole? And so it is amazing, no? It's to have the opportunity to work with the community, to listen to these conversations and being part of the transformation that happened. That everyone, in my experience, we have been, I don't know in how many neighborhoods, but everyone wants to be part of a transformation. Everyone wants to improve their own community, their own families as as a whole. It's not just me myself by myself, but knowing that everyone in the family, the community, and across. And but when listening, each neighborhood, each group is different. Sometimes is technology and being able to support their children when going all of a sudden parents found themselves being IT support for their children because they couldn't go to school, so they needed to be at home with their computers. And sometimes is no, they are afraid to go out and walk on the streets because of human trafficking. And sometimes it's who wants to go to a park or walk to the grocery store when it's 117, 120 degrees for 30 days on a road without any break in between. So, but then yes, all these issues are there. However, once there is the conversation of okay, these are all issues, how can we get uh, what are the solutions, what are some activities that you see in your own community, then there is a different way of refining. It's not about having a conversation of these are all the problems, but these are different things that we can do. These are different positive activities that proactive activities that we can do to really change our built environment and start working from there. I truly I have the best job of everything because I work with over 200 community health workers that are so invested in their community, and from there we get to. And I know that Darren will say, "No, you don't have. I have the best job." um, and these individuals are truly invested in their communities, and we see the opportunities that each individual brings to the table, regardless of what the background is or the history is. Today is about looking at what is today and what can we do today for a better tomorrow. And that's really what we are working on.
I think I have the best job. It's pretty good if you think you have the best job after all these years. So at Common Justice, we work like squarely exclusively on serious violence. And so part of our question in thinking about serious violence is what if the people who know most what needs to be done about violence are the people who survive it? And what if the people who have the most to give, both by obligation and capacity, in addressing that violence are the people who've caused it? And so we work with restorative justice practices, which are practices that bring together the people responsible for and harmed by a given incident to come together and talk about what happened, how it impacted people, what the responsible person can do to make things as right as possible. And we do that as a diversion from serious prison time. So we run what is the first, but no longer the only, alternative to incarceration for serious and violent felonies in America. We work with cases like stabbings and shootings and gunpoint robberies in New York City. And if and only if the survivors, the victims in those cases agree, the people responsible come into a program with us where they spend 15 months going through an intensive violence intervention curriculum. They're supported around securing stability in housing and income and engagement in positive activity. They're supported in reflecting on where violence comes from in their lives, where their choices about violence are rooted, and finding ways that other choices can become available to them. And partly through, they sit down with the person they harmed and they acknowledge the pain that they've caused, and they hear that person's story and they answer that person's questions. And together, that group, them and their support people, their loved ones, the people walking with them, the loved ones of those harmed, come up with agreements about how they can make things as right as possible. And those include things for the survivor, like paying restitution and apologizing and that sort of thing. They include things that are about the transformation of the person who committed the harm. So that might be going to school, getting work, going to therapy, treatment, reading about their own culture, reading about another culture. And they include things that are paying it forward, like community service, talking to younger people who otherwise would go down the same road, like doing right by their neighbors and their community and their place. And if they do all those things, they don't go to prison, and the felony charges against them are dismissed. And in the meantime, we work with the people whom they harm to help them come through what happened to them and in their lives generally. And we believe very deeply in accountability. And I think it's this question, the question is about a community, but I think when we talk about accountability, we usually, it's understood to mean the same thing as punishment. We're like, we want him held accountable, and that means we want him arrested and locked up for the longest possible time. But the longer I do this work, the more I'm convinced that not only are accountability and punishment not the same, they're incompatible. Like, punishment is passive. Punishment is something someone does to you. Like, what you do in punishment is you don't escape it, right? Accountability is different. Accountability requires that you acknowledge what you did, you acknowledge its impact, you express genuine remorse, you make things as right as possible, ideally in a way that's defined by those you harm, and you do the incredibly hard labor of becoming somebody who won't do that ever again. Like, for all of us, I think accountability is some of the hardest work we will ever do in our lives. Like, the only work that maybe competes with it is the work of healing, right? Healing gets a bad rap for being soft. I'm like, anyone who's healed knows it's the hardest work any of us ever do. And so we believe very deeply in accountability. And we believe that not only when people cause harm do people have an obligation to repair that harm, but we also believe that in each of us, like that each of us are possessed of sufficient human dignity, human agency and possibility that we can mend what we have broken, that we have it in it to repair it. And that in repairing it, we repair the damage we do to ourselves by doing something that never felt right to do in the first place, right? And we heal the parts of ourselves that survived so much violence that violence became normal, and we get to start finally saying, you know, like, what happened to me was wrong too. And I know that, and because I know that, I know what I did to you is also wrong. And then those who survive harm get to do the things we as survivors want. They get to be like, why me? Was it a real gun? What if I'd fought back? What if I hadn't fought back? How dare you? Do you know how much I needed that money and what I needed it for? Like, F you. Like, all of it. Everything they need to say, right? And to get answers to their questions that nothing anywhere in the criminal legal system will ever offer to them. And I come to this work as someone who's caused harm but didn't face criminal penalties for it because I was white as a kid too. And I also come to this work as a survivor, right? Like, I come to it as somebody who survived rape, who has lost loved ones to murder, who has experienced serious assault. So I don't underestimate the seriousness of how violence continues to reverberate in someone's life. And what I know is at the end of the day, survivors, we want two things. We want it not to happen to us again, and we don't want it to happen to anyone else ever again. And when we're faced with a choice, We are going to choose the thing that we think will prevent those two things. At Common Justice, 90% of the survivors offered this option say yes. These are not only half of victims anywhere call the police in the first place, another half will drop out by like what in New York is the grand jury, other places it's like the first evidentiary hearing, whatever it is, like that first step in the criminal justice system, people be out. So this is like that small 25% that are still in a process that's likely to result in the incarceration of the person who hurt them. And of that, people who've been through terrible things, who were unconscious for days in the hospital with lifelong injuries, like lacerations to their liver, right? All of this. And 90% of them say yes. And it's not mostly about mercy. Once in a while it is. It's pragmatic. It's that they want to know this won't happen to them or anyone else ever again. And anyone who lives in a neighborhood where incarceration is common knows that incarceration can't keep the promise of safety. You know, like we know that if prison worked, America would be the single safest nation in all of human history, right? No place has ever locked up its people more. But even more than that, the black and brown neighborhoods where incarceration is common would be like the Garden of Eden. I mean, it would be the kind of thing like if a kitten got hit by a car, you have to have a vigil because people would be like, we just aren't used to that kind of loss, y'all. You know, like if it worked, they would be the safest places on earth. That is not what these things have produced. And so when we reject the dominance of law enforcement in producing safety, partly I reject it in the names of my incarcerated and formerly incarcerated brothers and sisters. I reject it in the names of the kids I grew up with who were locked up for the very same things I did that I got to walk away from because of my whiteness. But in some ways, most of all, I reject it in the name of all the kids I buried when I was still a kid. I reject it in the name of all the survivors who were told we would be safe if we just put enough of our money in police and jails, and who were not safe, who were hurt in ways we never should have been, right? And then when those same people stand up and say over the graves of our children that they want more money to do more of the same, shame on them. Like any of us who have suffered those losses know that it is a morally intolerable position to say that what is needed is more of the same. So maybe if you live in a neighborhood without violence, and maybe if you live in a neighborhood without prison, more of the same seems perfectly nice. But offering more of the same in a place where that has only produced death for generations, to me has no basis in our moral relationship with one another. And so when we say we insist on solutions other than law enforcement, what we mean is we want a summer where no mother buries her child, like where we want nothing but barbecues and picnics and not one funeral the whole season long. And until we see that, like none of us will be done.
So, go forth on this panel is the worst, by the way. I keep want to say yes, and it's like you're a double dutch wanting to jump in. So there's a few things that go through my head when I hear this, because the question was, what do you think about community and safety? And it doesn't matter where I go. If I ask anybody in the room and say, what are some of the neighborhoods that you say, oh, those are neighborhoods that are unsafe? You probably could yell them out, right? In New York, people would say the South Bronx, South Jamaica, Queens, Far Rock, Brownsville, East New York, right? Same neighborhoods. It's actually the same neighborhoods for years and years and years, right? And then when you go to those communities, if you talk about who are the people who are most likely to be victims or perpetrators of next violent crime, the same names will come up. The police are talking about them, the schools are talking about them because they dropped out, the child welfare system talking about them, communities talking about them. Everybody knows. So we know the place and we know the people. So anytime I think about going into a neighborhood, the one thing I have to acknowledge is neighborhood didn't fall into disinvestment overnight. Right? And at the same time, it's irresponsible for us as neighborhoods, people, to solve a problem that they didn't create. That you have to, at least I believe, that there is a responsibility that government has to acknowledge the harm. There has to be a moment of reckoning and then a healing before we can move forward. And then when we move forward, we need to pay community for their time. I can't stand how much we ask poor people to give up their time to go to meetings to solve problems when they didn't create it. It's unacceptable. And on top of it, when we talk community, we talk at the very highest levels. I love the grandmas, but the grandmas in that the community of the future. And their perspective of how they see their neighborhood is one perspective. Why aren't we digging deep? So here's what I would say. Community work is no different than a relationship. People go, well, how do you do community work? It's not a how to, it's a desire to. A desire of a relationship. That means you show up every day. I'm not going anywhere. You say sorry. You seek permission, right? Like you know your place. But then on top of it, once we get there, I think it's very critical that we don't treat community as just say, here's the problem. Let's really talk about how the problem got there. And so one of the things that I was talking about earlier, that when folks talk about all we have are construction jobs, I want our young people to first start off by saying, how can I start thinking about this through a lens of a social scientist? Let's look at the data. What does the data say? How does that impact how your life and how you live? And let's talk about that. And anytime you do these mapping exercises where there's low education and there's poverty and there's health issues, there's crime, right? Like they all overlay. So first is taking that step back. Now this has actually been a neighborhood for a while. You've built a relationship. Then the question becomes, how do we go out and gather more information? And so we would put forward this participatory action research, where again we're training people from the community to own their information. Too many times we get universities who parachute in, academia loves studying poor people. And they come back and write their really cool reports and nothing ever happens. Community needs to own everything from the data to the information to then coming up with a solution. Now here's the thing, here's why I disagree with a lot of people about asking community what they want. People tend to want what they believe is possible. And so the bar is very low. I can't tell you how many times I say, what could you do? If I had to hear another freaking basketball tournament or another barbecue as the way to solve the issue, my head's gonna explode. But that's what communities expect. And I remember one of the moments where I was most proud when we turned this streets. Now, in New York, to turn a street into a plaza, take away parking is a big deal. And we were so proud of the work that the young people were able to do and negotiate with the Department of Transportation and get the street closed and turn this into a plaza. And I remember at a community meeting, somebody said, oh boy, this ain't good. They said, who is this for? Because it can't be for us. And that was the moment where I realized people who never had don't expect to have the highest quality of anything. And so it's very critical that as you're a community, that it's long term. And anybody here thinks about how you've been raised, how you were raised, or if you have children. It's not about when they're growing up and they try things that they're gonna do and say, you're gonna do this and this, right? It's to try things that you don't want to do for the rest of your life. But many times we go as a community and we have one tool or two tools, and we say, if you do these, here's what you can do. That's unacceptable. So again, I think it's about going to the neighborhood, building a relationship, identifying the folks who've been most marginalized. It's engaging them to be social scientists, criminologists, urban planners, giving them the skill sets to go out and solve these problems, making sure it's constantly talked about, revisiting and iterating, right? Because the one thing is no problem is ever solved, it just turns into solving the next thing. We keep moving and we keep moving. So that's really what I think is the most important part of community, is that we constantly are working every day to solve the thing in front of us while planning that big thing that's happening 3 to 5 years from now. Small tangible wins while thinking about a long-term plan. So those are the ways we think about community and how I would go into a neighborhood. I would never go into a neighborhood on a 3-year cycle where you philanthropy, I love your money, but in 3 years we're not going to solve this community issue. We might be able to do some nice things that feel good about ourselves, but if you want to solve these things, it's a long-term investment in our neighborhoods that have been harmed.
Thank you. So we hear a lot more these days than we used to about trauma. And the research shows that trauma is at the root of all of these social problems, substance misuse, behavioral health issues, violence. How does trauma show up in the communities that you work with? And how do you think it can best be addressed in the context of this community approach?
Next.
Yeah.
Oh,
Maybe we don't have to go.
no. You got to go with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now I feel safe. You got that. All right. So, James said it very well, and Dr. Emma said it very well. There was a cross section of what James said um, in regards to uh, how trauma can be dealt with. It's not a quick overnight solution as far as any of this developmental way of addressing how we can be okay. It's just not so easily resolved, so therefore it has to have a broader scope. And I appreciate you even adding on to um, the fact that if a person comes to me and says, "Man, I just need a job," I just hear that so often. I this is not founder syndrome. I know that that person is plugging in to what Dr. Emma is talking about, a bigger scenario, a bigger picture. So this is my role. My role is to say, yeah, your job is getting ready to feed into a bigger picture. I love it. I got an 82-year-old. We go to a place called Ye Old Watering Hole. Yes, that's not quite the name of it. I probably got to protect the name of it because I go to, and I got trauma. Remember, y'all. So, but we go to this place and we walk in, and he goes, "Find out about the foundation is in the house." 82 years old. He's so proud of it. He probably works maybe 9 hours a week, right? And it subsidizes and adds a little bit. He's actually at $20 an hour now. Yeah, I think I'm paying a little too much. He's my buddy though. And he went for $15 an hour. And then he's so proud after 15 years of prison, after not recidivating in that, traditional 2 to 3 years. In our area code, folks actually recidivate. They go right back into the system. But he's been with us for about 12 years. So again, it's taking those incredible wins when you look at um, his trauma, right? And then you even put maybe some of mine. However, my value added is a little different to the bigger scenario. And then to Dr. Emma's point, really asking folks still and combining it with what James is talking about, but still asking folks, what are you looking for? It might just be a job, and it might just, man, I'm just trying to keep a consistent roof over my head. But and maybe three or four others that are around you in that growth that you've had. This April will be the 18th year for Tiger Mountain Foundation, and my 34th year since leaving Maximum Security doing this work. And by the way, every time someone talks, I think they have the best job. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, we got pretty good jobs, Danielle. But yeah, that's what I see as trauma resolution, or at least tackling. We don't ever resolve anything. I don't think ever. That's that old, beautiful, grand perfection that we all are. But at the end of the day, though, I think we owe it to ourselves, as James said, to continue to tackle this on a continuity basis that is not just putting a band-aid on it. And so that's what I love best about my position for sure, is that I'm able to constantly, here's a garden term, cultivate what I see as opportunity, not only for myself to deal with my trauma, but to deal with my community's trauma. I'm constantly building. We got an integrative healthcare facility that we will actually have equity in. And it'll be starting building from gardens, right? We have a housing opportunity that we will have equity in. And then contractually, we're obligated to keep the edible landscaping. As we build it in the hottest heat index areas in the United States of America very climatically and environmentally smart. So our reusable materials and our use of solar to decrease our energy usage, right? That's my role, right? And then my man comes up the next day, and man, he might have worked his 9 hours. The time out the foundation is in the house because he built that, and I'm so proud of that. That's how we deal with our trauma. So, but impact.
So, I have based on one comment that James mentioned is recognizing um, everything that we do in the daily basis, and we don't even realize how we contribute to um, perpetuate to we continue to add to the disparities. We continue to add to um, the discrimination is so common, and we have normalized it in such a way in our language and our way of looking at things. But when someone makes the decision that they have to leave their family behind, or they have to go through, how many miles are from South America, from Venezuela, all the way to the border with Arizona. I honestly don't know. But when someone decides, I need to make that journey for the safety of my family, it is a lot. It's not a decision that you make in a moment. It's it's something that your life has become so terrible. Your situation have become so terrible that you have decided. When someone decides to go, I'm originally from Puerto Rico. When someone decides to go from Dominican Republic, crossing the Canal de la Mona to get to Puerto Rico in this inflatable boat, and they do it every day just to try to. They get to Puerto Rico, then they get deported back to the Dominican Republic or to Cuba, and people will try it again, and they do it. So you don't risk your life just because you want to get an ice cream someplace else. Um, and then you are going through that trip, and you get raped in that journey on front of your child. So it's not just the decision that you made, but also everything that you are experiencing through that. So of course there will be a lot of trauma, and we see it every single day. And in one way or another, directly or indirectly, everyone that we interact, they have their own traumas that they went, and we all deal with it differently. However, I can tell you that heart disease, cancer are the number one cause of morbidity and mortality in United States, in Arizona included. So that's how the trauma gets that's manifested. Is that all that emotional component? We see it we see it in chronic disease, and we see it, yeah, it's increasing. Obesity increasing is how we deal. The body cannot tolerate, cannot support all those issues that you're going, all that emotion, and gets manifested physically. However, one thing that we have known, and actually Tiger Mountain, Darren, Darren and I have collaborated, um, is in what is called community therapy. And in the community therapy is where you as a community members, you as individuals, you identify what are the issues that you want to address. And you as a community members, you identify solutions and how you work in order to solve some of these issues. It's not about counseling or therapy because we know that that doesn't exist in our communities. So but it is how our lived experiences, how can we listen to each other, and how from there, how can we learn from each other to get to a better place. And that's where that solutions, the popular knowledge of the solutions are within the community. And for many of us, it may take longer or shorter amount of time, but it is that unity developing a sense of belonging. So it doesn't matter if your accent or your color may be different than what some other individuals, but that you belong, the sense of belonging to, and that you have a purpose. When communities across the world are being studied and identified what is the longevity and the high quality of life in that longevity. It's the sense of unity. It's the sense of, of having a purpose in life that everyone counts. And if we can get to that, if other places, other communities have gone to that, why couldn't we get to that at all levels in Arizona and United States?
I totally forgot what I was going to say. I was just listening. No, it resonates so much, and I think it's so. Right. I mean, the question about trauma, right? There's like the harm we experience as individuals, right? Like there is the harm of our families and loved ones, the harms that we witness, the harms our ancestors experienced that also get written into our bodies. You know, like the same way we learn, like our bodies teach the next generation, like if you see a tiger, run. You know, like it's built into us to pass on these ancestral learnings about what is safe and what is unsafe. Like that's how any animals, including us, survive. And so it means like our bodies are built to pass lessons through generations, like in our blood, in our DNA, in our bones. And so many of the lessons we have passed are lessons of pain, right? They're lessons of surviving pain. And for people who have been oppressors, they are lessons of inflicting pain, right? They change our biological composition, right? Because our bodies teach the bodies that come from us what to do and how to be in the world. And so when I think about trauma, like of course, like I think the narrow thing of our work, I think you survive violence, it's a traumatic experience, you have post-traumatic stress disorder that has certain symptoms, right? There's all of that. But there's a piece to it that is shared, there's a piece to it that's communal, there's a piece to it that's ancestral, there's a piece for many of us that what is done to us is not always the hardest thing. Sometimes witnessing something done to those we love actually haunts us far more. Sometimes the things we have done to others haunt us in the same ways as the things we have survived, right? So it's not as simple as like you've been hurt and now it's not just like a broken leg and now you still have a scar or it hurts a little in the winter, right? It's different the way it gets built into us. And so I think that also means that healing from trauma has to be all those things, right? It has to address physical injury, it has to address emotional and psychological injury to a specific person. It has to address the way that pain reverberates in community and relationship, the way it disconnects us from each other. It has to reach back into the generations. It wasn't until I had a kid I realized you could heal the past. Like, because white people, we really believe in linear time. We're like, a thing happened and then there's nothing you can do about it and you just keep going forward. And that's also preferable for us because we've done terrible things. So it's better for white people if we don't discuss the past. Like, the past is not a good look for us. That's part of why we're very like, people are like, this happened yesterday, and we're like, why are you holding a grudge? You know, like it's just kind of our MO because we're like, oh, you know, like we don't, and I don't think we have. I think one of the things that is not written into us sufficiently is any sense of the possibility of repair, right? Like we don't know that, like you can mend harm that you've caused, that is actually a thing that people know how to do, and we have insufficient knowledge of that, and it makes us horrific and weird. And so some of it is like, how do we? I was like, I think that's the first time I've described white people as horrific, and we have to stand by it. I was like, I told you I woke up at 2 a.m. that time, and I'm like, I think that holds true. I'm like, I think you read any major newspaper this morning, and you will find that what I've shared with you measures up. But I think so. Some of it is there's all sorts of healing, right? That has to happen in those ways, and that healing is going to have to happen while harm still occurs, right? And so we, like, one of the things we've done at Common Justice that our collaborators have done is build a new way to measure healing. There's all these measures of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And they're like, you know, the symptoms are you hypervigilant? Like, are you jumpy? And do you have nightmares? And you have all these things. And then do those things stop? And it's impossible for any good program to measure its outcomes that way, because you have 50 incidents that happened before you came, and between the first time you took the baseline exam where you're asked to reflect on the worst thing that ever happened to you, as though like that's one thing. And like I remember taking one and being like, was it this, or like which was worse? Like, was my sexual assault or my best friend bleeding out of my arms worse? Because I'm trying to do my homework right. So I was like, I really want to answer this questionnaire correctly, right? Like, it's a crazy way to frame these questions. It's how they're all structured. And then they presume that that's in the past, and that now all you're doing is getting better. And what actually happens for people is that everything that contributed to the reason they were harmed for the first time keeps happening. Like, they continue to suffer losses, people around them suffer losses, they continue to witness pain. Like, all of that still happens. And then programs are trying to prove that they're helpful, and then the second measure is worse than the first, and it looks like they caused harm, right? And then everyone's like, see, these community-based programs don't know how to do healing, and so we'll just put all our money in cognitive-based therapy. Well, someone on my team jokes that any conversation I'll find a way to say something negative about CBT. Like, even if it's like talking about, like, I've almost found a way to do it when you're talking about sports teams I didn't know. So I've done that for the night. But I think so the measure that we helped co-create, like that we launched, like started with the question of like, what if instead of measuring the absence of trauma, we measured the presence of healing? So it's not, are you not hypervigilant? Are you not jumpy? Are you not having nightmares? But like, what does healing look like? And so this was, who's not a creator of it, it's the first measure we know that is like gold standard, scientifically validated, developed only by people of color. It is like in the United States, of course, there are ones outside of the United States. And the people who co-created include formerly incarcerated people, survivors of violence, like people who've suffered from like community violence, systemic harms, all of those things. And it asks things like, the kinds of questions on it are things like, I know what happened to me wasn't my fault. I believe I deserve to tell somebody what happened to me. I believe one day I could feel different than how I feel today. I know my pain connects me to others rather than separates me from them. I know I am worthy even though this happened to me. Like, I know there is wisdom in my pain, not only loss. I know things I can do when the pain is too much that bring it into a range that I can survive. I want to survive. I am capable of feeling joy. Right? Which doesn't mean I'm not sad, right? But I am capable of feeling joy. When I first read the first draft of the measure, I was like, this is the best poem I've ever read. Like, it was so beautiful. And that those things are things that can happen even as people continue to experience additional traumatic events, right? Whether those are individual or collective, right? That people can still continually build. Can tell someone a little faster what happened, can be a little more truthful, can blame themselves a little less, can find a way to feel sorrow and joy simultaneously a little sooner. I remember very early in my life, there was a mother in my neighborhood who had lost her kid to violence, who was often very joyful, and I was so confused by it. Like, I just didn't understand it. Like, I couldn't make sense of it. And I asked her, I was like, can I ask you, like, how are you so joyful? And she was like, baby, I realized a long time ago I couldn't wait until I wasn't sad to start being happy. And there's such deep wisdom in that, right? And And so this measure is also partly designed to help uplift the most transformative work happening in like the kind of work y'all are describing, right? Where you're not going to work with someone who is hurt once and then gets your one limited intervention and then is fine. Like that's not what you've signed up to do, right? But where you could actually in this way help people measure for themselves, you measure for your own reflection on your work, and measure to be able to demonstrate to the world the efficacy of what you're doing, like the ever increasing presence of healing, even in the like persistent context of enduring pain. And when people are healing, people can do anything. Um, like anything. Like I only learned about those like Marvel movies recently, but Wolverine, man, like he like his superpower is healing. Like whatever happens, it's amazing. And like everyone's like focused on the claws. That's not the impressive part. Like the part that makes him immortal, the part that makes him so strong is this capacity to heal, right? And like when we can heal, there's very little we can't do. And I think so much, and the last thing I'll say is I think so much trauma, like even if you like not as much in how like the DSM defines trauma, though to some extent even there, but so much of trauma distills down to powerlessness in an instance collectively, which means that like the opposite of trauma isn't health. The opposite of trauma is power. And so much of our work healing is about cultivating that kind of power.
I was talking earlier about those 50 to 75 people in any community you go to, you keep hearing them come up and come up. And what you'll realize as you get to know those 50 to 75 people is that every day they have to wear this mask of how people have told them who they are, this mask of how they want to be seen in their community. And behind that mask is people who many times are just broken. And, one of the things that I used to ask our young people after a while when they would come to programming, and also create programming where there's no failing, by the way. Many programs set you up to fail, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. See, they don't want to work with me. So there's no failing. It's not ready for you. You're not ready for it right now. But one of the things that always came up, there was this lack of hope and belief that anything could be different.
Mm-hmm.
And when people don't have hope that their lives can be different, they're right? Ford said, "If you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right?" Right? And that really is how our young people see themselves. And so what happens is you create a new scoreboard. We all want to win. So how does our young people in our communities, especially our young men, win? It's by how many women they can be with. It's by how many people I can fuck up. It's by how many, right? Like a lot of their scoreboard that defines their status in their neighborhood, unfortunately, has a lot of negative connotation that comes with it. But in their community, they're seen in a way that they're winning. And so the question is how do you start to redefine who these folks are, what is winning? And I remember when I first started the court system 25 years ago, in the morning we would say, okay, how many cases do we have today? And inevitably the court would say there's 30 bodies downstairs, right? And so you start by calling people bodies, and then we call them clients, right? But we never call them participants or leaders, right? And until we start changing how we are talking about the same people that we claim that we're trying to help, we're continuing to harm and continuing to cause harm. And again, I want to be very mindful that what our young people have dealt with I don't think I could have done it and been as strong as they are. And so their resiliency is off the hook. But at the same time, we have a responsibility to kind of feed into how do we get to siblings and how do we bring back hope and believe that something can change. And when we live in this country, campaigns used to be about hope and prosperity, and now it's about fear. We have to get back to this idea that we can be great, both in people and in community. And so that's really what I hope folks can take away. If you're going to do this work, how do you start to see those individuals in a very different light? Because that mess that they have in front of you is just to survive.
So I have a whole list of questions here, but it's 7 o'clock. We got a late start. What I'd love to do, if it's okay with everyone, is ask if there's any burning things that you really want to share, that ideas that came up, bouncing off of what other people were talking about, that you want to bring up in the room. And if not, let's turn it all over to all of you and have a conversation together. Take your questions. We did have the little card, so if you want to do a little card, you can. But we're a community here, a small knit, non-sporting community. And I'd love for us to just have a conversation together. How's that work? Cool? Okay. Any burning issues, wisdom to share? Yeah.
This is it's easy to comment with this group because they just kind of set you up for your next answer. James talked about participants. It is something that I consider myself a participant of the organization that I work for. I gave myself a lofty title because of my trauma, right? I couldn't get King of England, so somebody took that one already. So I'm CEO and founder, and I'm also a participant. I gotta keep it grounded and I gotta keep it real. I am part of this whole picture. But I love that comment that people say, okay, well, Darren, that sounds pretty cool. So you and the other participants know your ass is a participant too, because I just hired you. And remember, I'm not King of England, but I am the CEO and founder, and I'm a participant. We are all participants. We are all participants. So I just that man, but when you said that, I thought I really founded our safety based on our reciprocal spoke in the wheel concept. My role's different, right? And I get that. And then my responsibility, like you say, Danielle, is I got to stay true to that. But I got to stay a participant so that I can really do what I'm supposed to do as that reciprocal spoken whistle. So that was burning me up.
Oh, that's thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna jump on that actually, if I may, because so much of the work that we've been doing in community is asking people, what does safety look like? What does that mean to you? And what we hear consistently is about community and belonging. And it's been spoken to frequently already tonight. And that used to be kind of like this woo-woo thing, like, oh, that's nice. But really, that is so much at the heart of safety. And what we find is this struggle where in the culture that we're generally a part of, safety is constructed as being safety from other people, safety from those folks who potentially you fear could harm you. Whereas actually safety is found with other people. We are what make us safe. And building those relationships, strengthening those relationships, having actual meaningful exchanges with people brings us out from behind these preconceived ideas that we have, the fear that we have, the rhetoric that we consume. It makes such a huge difference. And so I think that it's reflected in so many different ways in what everyone's speaking to tonight. So what are your questions? Lay it on us. It's hilarious.
Sorry, I missed the front part. I was stuck in traffic.
That's okay. We just bend with the cars. With the cars.
This is my question. Curious to know if there's any other organization working on any legislation at the state level. What is that in around the criminal justice and social justice space, and also how, I guess, tips or how you work across coalitions to get some of these things done. So I like the two-part question.
Yeah, I mean, if I could, I'll just dive in. Yeah, this is huge. You definitely, again, to this panel's points, you want to get involved in policy because if I am able, and we have that type of bandwidth, because you can have these types of discussions, and then safety, again, systemically, is going to always fall short of its betterment. It's going to fall short if you don't have a community garden policy that now includes folks who could be part of reentry. Because I have 6 folks who have had a murder charge who are doing really well in life these days. One, the couple were tried before they were 21 years old, but they reacclimated, and they have a safer place to proceed. Again, this panel has said it very well from the standpoint of the vision is different because of my placement and my connectivity. So yes, it starts with how you can even affect how you were viewed and what is acceptable, because that is always typically them versus us. So you gotta, I was gonna say infiltrate, but you need to somehow be part of municipality discussions as it relates to environment and equality and justice, and definitely policy on all levels.
I just wanted, as an organization, many years ago, we made a decision to be kind of this private-public partnership where I think a lot of the way we try to operate is a little bit in the shadows. So in a lot of the work, it's not as if we are leading legislation, except that we are encouraging and influencing legislation from behind the scenes, giving folks who are writing, saying, here's some more information, here's what we're learning, here's what we're seeing. I think having a shop that actually has a research component to it, an operations component to it, and also a technical assistance component to it, it's this idea around kind of doing, researching it, and teaching it. And through that, we are able to take that information and offer it up. I would also say it's not for everybody. There's a lot of people who join the organization and we're not radical enough. And people say this is not where I want to work. And I think it's very important for folks who want to get into this field to figure out where do they want to stand on the spectrum. I like to work from inside out, and I believe that the influence I have on NYPD, that I can call my local police captain or the commissioner and bring up some of my concerns, but in a way that feels not threatening, is a way I've chosen to operate. And I can play it out of how it plays out in the neighborhoods that we serve. So it's not only my thoughts or an organizational thought, but then there's actual how it plays out in neighborhoods. So I would say we've influenced more legislation than we've actually written. And one area where I think we took more of a kind of a little bit trying to be more centered was when we were talking about the closed writers campaign, where we were just like the overuse of incarceration in New York City. We did play a little bit bigger role there, but I will say traditionally we are kind of more in the shadows.
So we've run our first legislation in the last couple of years. If we were in New York, I'd ask you to call your governor today. It's on her desk, but she's hasn't found her pen. But we passed it like really overwhelmingly through both houses of our legislature. It's called Fair Access to Victims' Compensation, and it's designed in a way that is like modeled that other states could mirror, and that hopefully our victory will let other states mirror. There's federal victims compensation money that comes to every state. It gets administered a little differently in different places. But almost every state, there's Iowa and one other, have also done some things to change the rules around this. The federal law says you have to promote reasonable cooperation with law enforcement in order to be eligible for victims compensation, that the agency has to do that. What 48 states interpret that to mean is that the victim of crime has to fully cooperate with law enforcement or they're not eligible for these benefits. So these are benefits that, for example, if you're the victim of a crime and you suffer an injury, they will cover your hospital bills. If you need to relocate, they'll help you with like emergency relocation funds or change the locks in your home. If you need ongoing physical therapy, if you need trauma-focused therapy. So not really things anyone would want, but for having survived harm. But the problem is because they require, if you don't report it to the police or cooperate with the district attorney, you're excluded from it, which means, like, if you are a survivor who is on probation or parole and you fear that the police will think that you were involved in something you shouldn't be and lock you up, you're not reporting it. If you live in a community where police have harmed you or people you love, you may feel unsafe calling the police. If you're an LGBTQIA survivor, if you do not have full citizenship and not every member of your family has full citizenship, you may feel unsafe calling the police. Like if you yourself have survived violence at the hands of the police, right? And that's the vast majority of survivors. And so the way this law gets interpreted, the federal law gets interpreted, which we think is wrong, excludes the vast majority of survivors from these basic life-saving services that all victims of crime deserve. And so what the New York legislation that we've passed now does is it says that if you report the crime to victim services and not to the police, that's enough. Like that's sufficient, and you can have access to this money that is already there. Like Arizona has money from the feds for victims' compensation. Every state has it. And every state blocks huge portions of survivors from accessing it in a way that exacerbates racial inequalities, exacerbates gender inequalities, causes great harm. And so, yeah, we love it. Everyone should go in. And the coalition question is exactly right. Like we won this right. We've won it through the legislature, and the governor will sign it. She has to sign it. Because there are hundreds of mothers who won't let her not sign it. So we've done a lot of organizing. So one thing is like we don't believe in policy work without organizing. And organizing also means like the members get to decide if you're going to take a compromise or not, right? Like you make those decisions collectively, not by yourself as an organization. Like whether you're going to be like, no, that comes too much for the heart of what we're trying to do, we're going to leave it on the table. Or whether you're like, okay, that still gets all the spirit of it and it's actually not that significant. Like let's take it and win. Right, because all policy work includes compromise, and the question is really like, are you making that an accountable relationship with the people who are going to be affected by your decision? And then the coalition that we put together that she's not here tonight, as you can tell, because I'm the only one from Common Justice. Our vice president of organizing and policy, Kira Shepard, and the policy and organizing teams have organized a coalition that includes mainstream victims advocates, like the state coalitions against sexual assault and domestic violence, that include people who do work against police violence, that include immigrant groups, that include faith community, that include like a range of people these legislators have never seen in the same room, right? Like they've seen each of them fighting for their own bill that have never, so when they all walk in together, it's like, it's disorienting and a little scary, which is part of what, that's a good campaign. And so if you look at commonjustice.org at the Fair Access to Victims Compensation page, there's a whole campaign page that has a ton of campaign materials that are designed in such a way that most of them would be like really easily transferable to another state because it's the federal pass-through money. So the moves needed in different places would be very, very similar.
For us, even though we are not working directly with legislation, policy comes in many ways, shape, or forms. And it is looking at our own policy as organization. What do we do in terms of equity and justice in how we work in the organization and working with others, as well as the education, the information that we share, even though knowledge doesn't change behavior, but every day we have the opportunity to provide evidence-based education to community, talking about tobacco cessation programs, talking about just different areas in life that could have an impact. At the end of the day, each of us are going to do whatever we choose to. But we have the opportunity to make an informed choice. How we use that information to be active in a school board with our children. How do we use that information to advocate for victims' rights? So again, even though we are not working directly with legislation, but we work with the individuals that can have an impact. Because at the end of the day, it is voters that make the choice. Questions?
Okay.
Well, this is first of all, follow up. So are you referring to the Victims of Crime Victims Fund? Is that the?
Yes.
So this is a follow up in Arizona. My understanding is Arizona solely uses their federal funds for that. It's been dwindling. Governor Hobbs put $19 million into it because in Arizona we prioritize giving money away to wealthy people. We're going to have a budget crisis, and it's my understanding is we have a $37 million shortfall, and domestic violence shelters are going to be on the edge of possibly shutting down. Kind of. So but we'll have lots of money for people in Paradise Valley. So so that's something I guess people wanted to follow up on. But yeah, I'm a research director to the Grand Canyon Institute, which is a nonprofit think tank, and I'm going to be doing that full time in January. So I'm going to be leaving my job here, which is not my best thing in my life right now. I always have to diss ASU every time I can. Anyway, but I'm interested more in the policy thing because we do policy advocacy thing, and part of our goal usually to help empower folks by providing information so that groups that are on the ground can use it to be more successful. We work in a lot of different areas, but since George Floyd's murder, we've been trying. I've worked with Luis Fernandez up at NAU, and we've been trying to do more on reinventing public safety. Anyway, so I'd be interested in what if you could be more, anybody could be more specific about having a wish list of policy and keep in mind we're still a red state here for the most part, so we're basically in the Neanderthal areas of if that's not put down on Neanderthal, but area of policy. But thank you.
I think there's a question over here.
Okay, so I think this conversation prompted a lot of thoughts for me. Appreciate all your perspectives that you bring to your experience. So I'm an abolitionist and an organizer as well as a policy advocate. And I'm trying to have conversations like this often with people that change their mind and encourage them to think beyond police and carceral systems. And kind of establish a starting point that is different from where people are at right now. Because what I'm finding is people conceptualize reality in like a very fixed way, and it's like hard to like bring in that sense of imagination, possibility. You talked about that earlier, and it still has not been shown that more is possible to them. They don't have expectations that are beyond that. Because people have been fed narratives their entire lives. You don't deserve better. This is all that's out there for you. So as people who want to enact change that will improve people's lives, I wanted to ask, like, how do you speak to folks in an effective way that broadens that imagination and allows them to see themselves in something more, whatever that may look like, and or having somebody spoken to you in that way that has like opened up your mind and made you like want to discuss ideas like this.
I love that question. And I like ask that question. I'd like to ask it to you and to everyone else who's doing this, right? Like, I think we have to always be asking. We spent a year until recently, and Jiva was here as part of it, convening people around the country who do organizing work related to ending mass incarceration, and a group of people who was at the beginning 90% abolitionists, I think maybe 100 by the end. And I'll have to confirm with the one pulled out that I'm representing that correctly. And what we sort of landed at in that process might sound obvious, but I think isn't in how we approach most of these communications kind of questions and narrative change questions, which is to think about approach that's fundamentally centered in inquiry. So not like what are the right things to say, but what are the right questions to ask. I don't know almost anyone who's changed their mind by being told something. I know people who have deepened the belief they had by being told something, right? Like you believe it and someone says it and you're like, yeah. And now I have even more things to make me believe, but maybe that happened for you tonight. But very few people like fundamentally change their views by being told, and especially not facts. Like facts are not a thing; they don't matter. Like that's not how we change as people. Like if you have a kid who's like, there's a monster under my bed, and you're like, there is a 98% chance there isn't a monster under your bed. Like nobody is sleeping that night. Like that you ain't sleeping, baby ain't sleeping. Like nobody's sleeping. Like what you do is you're like, how do you know it's a monster? Like what did you hear? Do you know it's a scary monster? How do you know it's not just lonely or hungry? My kid, by the way, is terrible at the playground because they play monster and the monster will be like, rah! And my kid will like go up to the kid pretending to be monster and be like, are you hungry? Are you sad? What do you need to do better? And I'm like, long game we're winning and we're trying to be super weird at the playgrounds. And you're like, just run with them. But you ask questions and you're like, okay, what do you do if the monster comes, right? And here's like, what can we make? Like, can we make a magical thing? What will we ask it, right? And you try and generate like curiosity and creativity around it. And similarly around these things, like one of the questions we like to ask is like, very often people don't want police to punish people. They want police to stop something from happening. And so we ask people things like, when is a time that you were in imminent danger and the police kept you safe? And that's just not actually what police do, like almost ever. And if they do, it's like an off-duty police officer who happened to be there because he was like waiting for the elevator, right? Like that's not how policing is structured. And so questions that help people surface that the thing they're seeking from it is not a thing that it ever provides, right? But not by telling people anything. Questions about times people have seen something that was escalating de-escalate, like something that was getting worse get better, right? And those sorts of things that draw people into their own lived experience, into their own curiosity. And so like our violence intervention curriculum that I mentioned in the diversion work we do is all questions, like 15 months is just questions. Because we are like, also that's with adolescents, you shouldn't tell adolescents anything ever. But I think we know that we learn more by being asked, we change more by being asked. And so I think we don't know, like I don't pretend we know that you'll be, to your point, right? You'll do this in relationships, you'll do it in community, you'll get to know people, like you'll spend time, but it's increasingly argued that the best conversations will not have like any talking points that don't have a question mark in it.
You know, what's challenging about the question is what I fear. And it's this idea that in the absence of something, without putting something in place, you actually get twofold going the other way. And we've seen in many cities around the country where the police force budgets were reduced, where there was less police, and when anything went wrong, it was the first default. Say, see, like it almost fueled the argument that it's because of that. And we know that's not the case. There was many other instances. But what, again, playing the infinite game, the idea in my thought is, how do you put systems out of business, right? And think about it from a supply and demand, that we're talking about felony cases being deferred as an alternative to incarceration in your courts is unprecedented, right? That would never have happened. And I remember back in the day, we treated misdemeanors as if they were felonies, right? So it's taken 15, 20 years to get to the point where we're trying to put misdemeanor business out of business. And then eventually, when I go to communities where people, young people specifically, say they don't think about safety, they actually don't even think about policing for the most part. It's just something that's around. And so it's difficult because of both the organization I work for, and I'm probably maybe the most moderate person on this panel, and maybe even my own organization. I do believe that there is a role for some level of policing, specifically around omnipresence, around keeping transportation systems. There's things I can imagine where I would rather have than that. But in regards to how it impacted our community, I really try to think about safer communities tend to say they have better policing. And it's only because they don't need the policing. So that's again, I'm not sure whether you would agree or disagree, but that's just kind of the way I think about it.
I got one. And I don't know if it's a question, a statement, maybe. Uh, how do you help people feel safe and heal who don't even realize and understand that they're traumatized because they normalize their trauma? And so we see it when it's normalized to them. How do you get to those people and have this safety conversation and dialogue? Have you thought about it?
Yeah, man, we've been like competing on who has the best job. I think we all have the hardest job in that regard as well. That's not easy. And it's going to flex and it's going to change per person. And it's always going to be humbling. So there is no, for me, exact correct answer other than to keep on doing the forward movement part of our conversations, all of our conversations. But whether you're an abolitionist or you actually feel that there is definitely a need, I you know, for every time that I was accused of something that I didn't do, my trauma made me do two things that weren't okay. That's how, to a point in this conversation, as James kind of related that, okay, if you're gonna not let me be okay, I'm gonna really be bad. Yeah. Oh, you ain't seen nothing yet, right? It's horrible. It's horrible. But that's part of that trauma. That I look at Arizona and the George Floyd national situation, and Arizona is a incredibly tough cookie as a progressive way to even think in terms of how you can be helpful, knowing that you have so many other obstacles to circumvent. It's such a humbling thing that you just keep thinking forward, knowing that you've improved in your life, knowing that others have improved in your life, and then knowing that again, I use that term grand imperfection. That the most humbling thing about it is you might not affect everybody. Tough as nails, and and I don't know if I'm mad at myself or ashamed that I don't even lose any sleep over it anymore because I actually revel in the fact that we do so much predominantly, I think, well in regards to being helpful and folks, being better. And I guess that my maturation said that's the best that I can do. So
I will. I will add to that it actually starts with you right here, right now, with all of us right here, right now, in recognizing where are we, where are our own biases, and how do we contribute every single day to that. A few, I think it was like a couple of years ago, the American Red Cross created a poster for pool safety. And it was a national poster and they distributed across. In the poster, it was all the things that you should be doing well, like walking or just swimming, and all the things that you shouldn't be doing, like running around the pool or pushing people or something. When you looked at the poster from the outside, you saw the good and the bad. When you really look at the poster, everyone that was in a bad behavior was black and brown. Everyone. And there was one Asian that was bad. um, but for a poster like that to go review after review and be published, there were a lot of people looking at that poster. How is that all these individuals look at the poster, didn't see it? And that's how we have normalized it. We have normalized that the good and bad behaviors to the point that even a poster doesn't even look at it when we're actually coloring it. But how do we contribute to that? And we do it every day. Honestly, every day we all do it. So I think that it is looking at each of us, looking at myself. How do I contribute it? How do I look at that same poster and saw that it was okay? Or what do I do today to make a difference? And it is that point that if we can have those conversations with communities, we can have the conversations with our own groups. And it's okay to recognize it. We have to recognize it. But at the same time, not stay like that. It's what we do afterwards. And I think that it is okay. Yes, many terrible things happen. But we have to get up. We have to be able to look at the situations in a different way and move forward. But moving forward with consciousness on what we are doing and how we are doing it. You should look at the poster. I encourage you to look at that poster as soon as you said the right.
So there's one question. Not everyone has spoken to the last question, and we're at
One more time.
what is it, 7:39-ish? So definitely want to give folks a chance to respond to the last question. Okay, so maybe we'll give Kat the last question. And then of course, if folks can stay after and chat and continue the conversation.
This question is for Dr. Emma, but anybody could probably answer it. Thinking about when we think about police and authority, I think communities and community members run to people who have authority and power to change or do something. And I really believe that community health workers can be that authoritative stance in a community when it comes to getting resources or getting accessibility to treatment or getting just information disseminated to them from maybe a doctor they can't get access to or a facility they don't have insurance coverage for. When I think about people who are coming out of institutions and jails and trauma in general, I think there's such a lack of knowledge of that these resources exist. But how can community health workers and these unlikely allies who have kind of maybe community authority step in and work with people who are coming out of these systems and catch them from maybe these more state-run entities that really just cycle people in and out? Because the common thread of tonight's conversation was harm happens to everybody, and it's our response to that harm that really dictates the outcome for not only the person who's been harmed, but the person who's caused that.
So I'll start. There are two. Actually, there are many ways that we can and we are responding. One is in primary prevention, and the focus now how we started what is safety, and really safety starts at the beginning of all of us, and nurturing that safety across the lifespan. And that is something that community health workers are great at in that primary prevention, which becomes, the nutrition, the physical activity, the family unity, the emotional health, and recognizing that component. And then there is the secondary prevention, where, yes, we already have the situation. How can we manage the situation, and we can to avoid complications to it? And in that case, is we have neighborhoods that may have a high crime area. One of the works that the community health worker have been doing in in having the conversations is identifying what are the issues, what do you see in your community, how do you want to work with it? And that's really how the conversations are being managed, no? How being facilitated, and it comes from the community itself. In terms of if safety is the number one priority, then how do we work in that? And the community health workers being part of that. Now, as it was mentioned, it's not that we go there, we do one thing, and then we move on to the next one. But it is, once we made the commitment to be in the neighborhood, we stay there, we identify those leaders, we cultivate those leaders for later on when they are ready to really take their own community and make those changes. That's the whole idea of the community health workers. You are there to provide an assistance and be in the bridge in whatever situation is. It could be in your health, or it could be during the birth of your child, or it could be at the beginning when you're just coming to the country. But but then from there is building the infrastructure, the support that you need in your own community to take that community, to take your family and your community to the next step. And then there is a tertiary prevention where you are really trying to prevent that. And knowing that is in extreme situations, death, no? And death comes, obviously, I'm making an analogy between all these crime and to what you will be, what we could imagine of George Floyd being an extreme. So it's not about putting yourself at risk, but to know when to intervene and how to stand to each other, to protect each other. And that is actually a role that the community health workers plays well, because they know their community, they have the trust of their community, so they can truly be those allies in all the situations and moving the being in solidarity with the community itself. So yes, and so sometimes we, because they are community health workers, the name or promotores de salud, we only look at that label, but really are leaders, key leaders on your community that are trusted individuals and can move the individual, can move the community from primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention working together.
Yeah, similar thought. Systems I mentioned earlier doesn't have to be a bad word. We create our systems. And so, um, community health worker, promotoras are folks who can actually be very helpful to folks in their community. And it's culturally, a very culturally competent way of addressing your community. And at Tiger Mountain Foundation, we have a point of entry called a personal strategy roadmap, where we ask you, where are you? Where do you want to go? Where, as an individual, and what do you see in your community, and how would you like to help? Right? Okay. Now what you've told me, you are now an instructor, a mentor, and an educator. Again, conceptually, reciprocally, you are a spoke in that wheel that turns that wheel. there's no one participant over another from that perspective. And that's why Tiger Mountain Foundation is in the house. I thought I told you that earlier. But that's my answer.
Anyone want to contribute on that, or last thoughts to share before we wrap?
Just my last thought since I was first, Danny. My last thought is I like to thank Just Communities that you get into a lot of different conversations, and I appreciate you guys, Deanna, Brother James, Caroline. So thank you guys for having me. I didn't know, well, I know Dr. Emma gave Dr. Emma that class and go after it and do, we really talk about these issues and work together. But it's been fantastic meeting you guys, and thank you guys for having me.
Thanks to everyone. Really appreciate the invitation to be with you.
Well, I will just echo those thanks. Thank you all so much for coming so far to be here with us in Arizona. Also, somebody sat in traffic for 10 minutes in the same spot. And for everyone joining us tonight. And yes, I would love to thank JCA staff for helping us out tonight, setting up all this stuff. Deanna, Enrique, and James. Thanks to the school and Lena up there somewhere helping us out with all the facilities, and opening the doors, and getting us in and out. And to all of you for sticking it out tonight when you could have been in baseball traffic. So, thank you to you. Just a quick note, we have our third and final Just Safety Dialogue in Flagstaff. Go on a road trip with us on the 24th, next Tuesday. A whole other panel of amazing, incredible geniuses talking about their work in communities in Arizona and then around the country, sharing these concrete models for what instead can actually look like in practice. So thank you all. Please take some steps, and we'll see you next time.